What's happening? Pod number 2 of this Monday, and it's draft week. We have to be ready for anything. And of course, Alex Barth on the show tomorrow, so I was not going to be able to address this on tomorrow's show. So I said, let's just do another pod today. It's the easiest way to handle this. Had to jump on the rumors and or reports from this afternoon. A lot going on. Let's start with Tony Pauline from Sportskeeda. Paulina wrote this past Wednesday evening, the day before Elliott Wolf announced the team was open for business with the third pick during the Patriots pre-draft press conference. Several people told me they thought the Patriots would trade down. One well-placed source told me he was convinced the team would move down. In Indianapolis, the belief was that if the Patriots could not select Jaden Daniels, they would trade deep into round 1 and select Michael Penix Jr. As of last week, the belief in the league is that should the Patriots make a trade with a team such as the Vikings or Broncos, they would lean towards selecting Penix in the middle of round 1. Then we got Adam Schefter with an update on Pat McAfee. New England is still more likely than not to make that pick at 3, and it's up to a team this week to change the Patriots' mind, which could happen, according to Adam Schefter. I read that as, hey, give us an offer. And of course, the final bombshell, if you want to call it a bombshell, from Diana Russini just about 2 hours ago, and why we're doing this podcast today and not waiting. Russini posted, the Patriots are listening and taking calls from teams looking to move into 3. Of course, she's talking about the third pick in the NFL draft. While GM Elliott Wolf is running point, I'm told the Patriots president, Jonathan Kraft, is heavily involved in the decision-making. Jonathan Kraft, heavily involved in the decision-making process with that third pick overall. It takes us back, doesn't it? It takes us back to that ESPN story after Bill Bellichick was shipped out. And at that time, Seth Wickersham and others wrote that Jonathan Kraft and Senior Vice President of Business Affairs for the Kraft Group, Robin Glazer, would chat off to the side with the staff, asking why the head coach had made certain decisions. This subtext of the conversations was that life in Gillette might be different soon. And in that ESPN piece, months ago, it was written, Belichick, who since the last Super Bowl win had slowly lost the core of his brain trust, had a mostly loyal staff who felt pinched between their boss and ownership. Word leaked around the office that if Belichick were gone in 2024, football operations would be split between Glazer and Jonathan Kraft. Patriots coaches and executives thought that the Kraft's meddling has got everyone spun around, a source on the personnel side said. Now remember, many people in that front office with Bill Belichick remain in that front office right now with Elliott Wolf. And at that time when the ESPN story came out, it was said somebody in the personnel side was concerned about the meddling from ownership, that the owners were getting involved too often about too many things. I have so many thoughts about this report from Diana Russini. Again, if you're just jumping in, thanks for joining us. As always, we appreciate you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Diana Russini reporting just about 2 hours ago that Elliott Wolf is running point regarding the third pick in the draft. However, President Jonathan Kraft is heavily involved in the decision-making process. If Russini's sourcing is correct, this is 100% a disastrous idea. And that's not hyperbole. It's not hyperbole whatsoever. This would be a disaster if Jonathan Kraft is making the decision, the final decision on what to do with the third pick. First of all, ownership's worried more about now, aren't they? They're worried about selling tickets. They're worried about being sexy. They're worried about TV games. They're worried about product. They're worried about right now. They're not worried about 2030. Robert Kraft is in his 80s. He's not worried about what's going to happen with this team in 2030 as much as he is concerned with what's going to happen with this team in 2024. But the idea that Jonathan Kraft would be the guy heavily involved, which again, I read that that Elliott Wolf is doing the grunt work. He's on the phone. He's making the calls. He's taking the calls. He's talking to teams, but he's not going to be the guy that's going to call the shot. Jonathan Kraft is heavily involved because he is going to have a huge voice in the room. That is Jonathan Kraft that has zero football credentials. Jonathan Kraft has not worked in a football front office. He has not scouted. He has not played at a high level. And if it's going to be him waltzing into the room to make that decision about the third pick in the draft, that's a mess. That's an absolute mess. I think it's a disaster. Ownership was always going to be involved. Let's acknowledge that. I've said that over and over and over again. You have to anticipate ownership being involved when it comes to having the third pick in the draft. Every owner in the league is going to weigh in. Every president is going to weigh in. They're going to have a seat at the table. And as a matter of fact, they should have a seat at the table. I have no problem whatsoever with Jonathan, Robert sitting there talking about this draft, giving their thoughts on who they like and who they don't like. I have no problem with it. They pay the bills. They own the team. And frankly, they can do whatever the hell they want to do. But I draw the line at making the decision. If you're telling me that Jonathan Kraft is heavily involved and just mostly heavily involved in the conversation part, then we can have that discussion. And we can say, well, okay, if he's getting heavily involved in the conversation, then I kind of understand because, again, it's management, it's ownership. Ownership has to be involved in that talk. But if you're telling me, like this post certainly seems like is telling us that Wolf is running point, i.e., the guy who's making the calls and taking the calls, while Jonathan Kraft is the one that is heavily involved in the decision-making, the way that is posted, the way that is written, tells us that Kraft is the one that's going to give the thumbs up or the thumbs down. And again, ownership being involved is not the problem. We should have all expected it. It's at what level ownership is involved. If they are making the pick, that's a problem. It is a huge problem. And every single solitary Patriots fan that watches this or listens to this or reads about this should be concerned by this. You do not want ownership interjecting in making the decisions that should be made by the football people. And I would not be surprised that if ownership is interjecting, it's interjecting with this third pick. Why? Because one of the things that has become obvious over the last few years is that this ownership has stayed mostly out of the football operation. However, when has the ownership stepped in? When has the ownership gotten a little bit more involved? It's always around the quarterback, isn't it? Tom Brady, TB12, Jimmy Garoppolo. That decision, Robert Kraft, heavily involved. Mac Jones, the idea of trading Mac Jones last offseason. Remember, in many other reports, those reports have said that Bill Bellichick last offseason wanted to entertain the idea of trading Mac Jones. He wanted to trade Mac, went to ownership. Ownership said, pump the brakes. We didn't like what happened in 2022 with the offensive staff. We want to see if Mac can revitalize his career. And then Belichick went back to ownership around the trading deadline this past season. And at that point, ownership was open to the idea of trading Mac, but nothing ever really evolved. So when there's been one thing that's been documented, reported on, all of it, it has been the quarterback position, and this ownership having their nose in it a little bit more than other times. So the fact that we're sitting here talking about the third pick in this draft and everybody thinks it's going to be a quarterback if they pick at 3, am I surprised that ownership would be heavily involved, that Jonathan Kraft would be heavily involved? I am not surprised whatsoever, because if there is one thing about this team that Jonathan Kraft is going to put his thumb on, it's the quarterback, because that's what his dad has done in the past. The quarterback position, let's get it straight here. Ownership cares about hitting on the quarterback. They care about hitting on the quarterback. Why? As I mentioned, face of the franchise, but number two, financially. If you hit on a quarterback in the draft, the price, obviously, compared to what you have to pay for top quarterbacks versus rookie contract quarterbacks, it's so vastly different. Hitting on the quarterback is much more valuable than any other position in the league because you're not paying other positions in the league 35, 40, 45, 50 million dollars every year, right? You're not dumping hundreds of millions of guaranteed dollars into other positions, but you're dumping that kind of freight into QB. So ownership to have a quarterback that is a franchise guy, a QB1 on a rookie scale deal, that makes owners go bananas in a good way. They do cartwheels. And so it's about price. It's about what price you pay to have to bring in another quarterback and how much savings you have at that position. If you hit on the pick, it's much more valuable than any other position in football. All right, let me jump to a super chat here. Josh weighs in, $2 super chat. Why would Jonathan Kraft want to trade the pick, though? I'm going to get into that a little bit later, Josh. I'm going to get into the idea of why Jonathan would want to trade the pick and if Jonathan wants to trade the pick. I'm going to go through all of it, folks. Sit back, relax. I am here to entertain, inform, and give you my opinions on this. And we're going to go through it all. We just started. I will get to this idea of Jonathan Kraft wanting to trade the pick and why would he want to trade that pick. I'm not so sold. Again, we'll get to it in a little while. How many owners that meddle in the football operation has brought success? How many times? Let's just look at Dallas as an example. Jerry Jones is the brightest example of how things can go wrong. When ownership takes a winning organization and tries to do too much because they're worried about their own ego, they're worried about not being remembered historically in the right way, and they want a piece of that juice. Because when a team wins a championship, who gets the credit? The quarterback gets the credit. And if it's not the quarterback, it's the coach. And in a situation like we had here in New England, it was both. Brady or Bellichick, Bellichick or Brady. How about both? In ownership, we see that now, right? With the Dynasty docuseries, with the Patriots eliminating Bill Belichick's likeness from the video that was sent out there in January. It's this idea that ownership wants some of the credit. They want their name attached to this in more than it is already attached. And so when you look at what's going on here, you can go back to Dallas. Dallas was in the middle of winning a bunch of football games, winning championships, right? And then what happened? Jerry Jones, Jimmy Johnson had that conflict, and Jerry wanted to call the shots. He did not want to give Jimmy Johnson the autonomy anymore. He wanted to be more involved. He wanted more of a say. He wanted to make some of those pivotal decisions. And Jimmy didn't want any of it. And it broke things up in Dallas. In Dallas, for the most part, since then, we know what's happened. Now, they've won football games. They've been an entertaining product, but championships? So we look at Jerry Jones as that example. When ownership meddles, things usually go horribly wrong. You don't find owners in 2024 calling the football shots and winning Super Bowls. Just not how it works. The way it works is that you hire the football people to make the football decisions, and you handle the business side of it. When you've got ownership making football decisions, no bueno. That's what scares the crap out of me with this. And we are talking about the most pivotal draft in how long? The Patriots have not drafted this high since the Drew Bledsoe draft in 1993. This draft is critical to this operation. If you miss in this draft, and I've said this before today, I've said if Elliott Wolf misses in this draft, if the front office misses in this draft, you could screw over the next 10 to 15 years. The rebuild, you'd be looking at another rebuild in 2 years, 3 years from now. You'd continue to be stuck in that quarterback's vortex, that cycle. This is such a huge moment for this football team, for this franchise, a gigantic moment. And I hope, and I might be hoping against hope, but I certainly hope that Jonathan Kraft is not going to be the decision maker during this draft. I want the football people making that decision. Because if you do it wrong, you could be ruining the next 8 to 10 years. If you think this past year has been terrible, if you think 22 and 23 wasn't fun, just wait for the future if you screw this draft up. It is way too big of a risk to put a non-football guy in position to make critical football decisions. If he wants to weigh in on an undrafted free agent and he wants to make a decision and pay an undrafted free agent, have at it, Jonathan. But I am not big on this idea that Jonathan Kraft is going to call this shot at number 3. All right, I have a lot more thoughts on this. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Every single thumbs up, of course, helps us defeat that YouTube algorithm, giving you a second podcast a day, the one-man band, the alternative, giving you as much content as I possibly can pump out as an individual. Give us that thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. The goal is 3,500 subscribers. If you catch this on Spotify, Apple Pods, rate and review. And what this would do, this would render Elliott Wolf a puppet. He would be a puppet. He wouldn't have any power. He'd be a puppet. And Jonathan Kraft would be pulling at those strings, right? The puppeteer. And Elliott Wolf would be just doing whatever Jonathan Kraft wants Elliott Wolf to do. And your de facto GM is pretty much a de facto nothing. If Jonathan is calling the shots, he's heavily involved. And when management gets heavily involved, you also open the door to miscommunication. Because you've got Wolf who's trying to make certain decisions, phone calls, right? But then you've got Jonathan Kraft who is getting heavily involved, and now you've got to update him on everything. And now things are a lot less fluid. And so now you're dealing with Elliott Wolf having to go to Kraft, then Kraft has to think about, what he's going to do or wants to do, and then gets back to Elliott Wolf, and it would just be a mess. It would be a mess if ownership is getting involved with this decision-making process as heavily as being reported. Again, I want to state this again. I do not have an issue with ownership being involved. The question is, how involved? A seat at the table is fine. A part of the conversation is expected. But if the heavily involved Elliott Wolf being the running point guy, if that means, and what I take it, when somebody says you're running point, that means that you're distributing, right? That you're taking and making the phone calls, but Jonathan Kraft being heavily involved is lurking over your back, your neck, and he's going to have a say in that room. So even if Elliott Wolf has the quote-unquote final say, how much can you trust that final say with how involved Jonathan Kraft is? We'll get into that in a minute. But the miscommunication, right? It opens the door when you have somebody who is above the de facto GM. Again, if it's as heavily involved as Diana Rossini tweeted out, if that is the case, then it's just one voice above the person who is supposed to be acting with the final say. And here's why it's a problem. Because, again, people might say, well, Nick, we don't know if Jonathan Kraft's going to make the final call. I understand that. I'm concerned with the heavily involved language. I think there's a reason why Diana Rossini chose heavily involved. But even if you say Elliott Wolf's going to make the final call, here's the issue. What is Elliott Wolf's contract status? Remind me. Oh, he's a lame duck. And now I've gone off of this idea that Elliott Wolf is going to remain, right? That you don't bring in Alonzo Highsmith. You don't hire him and bring him in. He doesn't leave Miami, his alma mater. He doesn't leave unless he has some kind of security beyond the next several months. And I continue to believe that. However, the concern from the very beginning with the lame duck front office was, why would the front office make certain decisions that they make? Are they making those decisions for what's best for the football team and what Elliott Wolf believes is what's best for the football team? Or do you have a lame duck front office that is acting at the behest of the president, Jonathan Kraft? And Elliott Wolf, is Elliott Wolf going to stand on the table and say, I disagree with you, Jonathan, we're going to go this way? And if he does, what is Jonathan Kraft's reaction? This shouldn't even be a part of the conversation, folks. We should not even be going down this road. But we are going down this road because it's obvious that Jonathan Kraft is more involved right now than he's ever been off of this report. If this sourcing is correct, if this sourcing is true, if Rossini is posting something that is heavily vetted, which I would imagine she is, then we have these conversations because of it. Because of it. And if Elliott Wolf, we have to now, unfortunately for Elliott Wolf, we have to wonder, does he have the final say? And if he does have the final say, how much will he be impacted by Jonathan Kraft being so heavily involved? These are so many questions that have to be asked, and I wish we didn't have to ask them, right? It would be the perfect world if we could just go in, understand the structure, not worry about it, and understand that ownership, yes, they will be involved. They will have a voice at the table, but they're not going to be heavily involved in making final calls or leaning on the GM in a certain way. In a perfect world, that's the way it would work, but far from the perfect world we are currently living in. There have been just way too many questions surrounding the organization during this offseason. And so I absolutely think when you look at this, when you look at these kinds of reports, these kinds of posts, it muddies it up. It muddies it up. It causes issues, especially when you have a lame duck front office for the most part. And here's another question. Jonathan Kraft, heavily involved. Is that why the front office has been handled the way it's been handled? Because I'll tell you, you know what is a very shrewd, passive-aggressive way to make the calls and to influence football decisions, but not get your hands dirty? It's to be in ownership, be heavily involved, influence decisions, have the front office with lame duck contracts knowing that they have jobs on the line, and then influencing those people to move a certain way, to persuade them. It is a passive-aggressive way. It is a passive-aggressive way for the ownership to put pressure on the front office to make decisions in the interest of the owners. It's a shrewd way. Here's another thing. With this report, who takes accountability? We've got Elliott Wolf, de facto GM. No security long-term from what we know of. Again, I think he's going to be here long-term, but until it's on paper, signed, sealed, and delivered, we don't know how long Elliott Wolf is going to be here. We don't know what kind of security he's been given in private conversations, if he has been given any security. So who takes the accountability? If we don't like what happens on Thursday night, do we blame Elliott Wolf? Do we blame Jonathan Kraft? Who gets the blame? Who takes the accountability for the decisions that are made, whether they're good or bad? It's just this Wizard of Oz mentality that I can't stand. Is Jonathan Kraft behind the curtain making all of this work? Meanwhile, the front office is going to take the bullets in case Thursday night looks ugly? Who takes the accountability? We just moved on from Bill Belichick. Wasn't great at taking accountability, as we know, when it came to personnel decisions. Are we moving into a next phase where we just don't have anybody taking accountability? Am I going to blame Elliott Wolf if I don't like what happens on Thursday night? Am I going to blame Jonathan Kraft? Am I going to give Jonathan Kraft credit for what happens on Thursday night? Nobody knows. Jump to another super chat, $5 super chat. Thank you, Charlie. If you want your comment question at the front of the line, you can send it via super chat. Haven't we heard prior that the Krafts would not be in the room when the decisions are made? I'm hoping this report is exaggerated. I'm hoping so too, Charlie. I'm hoping so too. I will get to that other side. As you know, if you've watched this show before, I try to weigh things evenly, right? I try to go through the process and think what's happening here, who leaked this, why did they leak this? Again, there's a lot to cover. The first step is to just look at this report on its base, on the foundation of it, and say, if Elliott Wolf is running point while Jonathan Kraft is heavily involved in the decision-making, which, again, I read that as Elliott Wolf is doing the grunt work while Jonathan Kraft is really going to have a part in this thing and say yes or no to certain questions. That's the case. What would it mean for this organization? That's the phase in we're right now of this conversation. We're going to move on to other parts in just a minute or two. But if this is truly what's happening and Jonathan Kraft is weighing heavily into these decisions, and he is now going to be the Wizard of Oz at Gillette Stadium, going back to that ESPN story about Robin Glazer and Kraft splitting personnel. And remember, Glazer was in the room for all of these interviews with the coaching staff. If that's the road we're going down, disaster. In my eyes, disaster. Do not want ownership meddling. Do not want non-football people making critical football decisions. But that's just the first step. We've got more. I'll just say this as well, and I don't know how many of you would agree. I would imagine many of you, and again, thanks Charlie and Josh for the super chats. I don't know how many of you would agree with this, but Robert Kraft would lose all trust, wouldn't he? Now, I know some fans will likely be okay with Kraft no matter what, but the vast majority of Patriots fans, I think you walk away, if this ends up being true, you walk away and you lose all trust in the Krafts. You lose all trust in the ownership because Robert Kraft has sat there. He has sat there. He has looked all of us in the eye, and he has said, we are not going to get involved with football decisions. We are not going to be looking at, scouting sheets and all. We're not going to get involved on the granular level. We're not going to be heavily involved in the football ops. Well, here we are, right? So if Jonathan Kraft is indeed heavily involved, then Robert lied. And Gerard Mayo went out there and said the same thing, that ownership has given them the autonomy, him and Elliott Wolf has given them the autonomy to move down the board, to take a quarterback at 3, to put the money on the table for Calvin Ridley. Well, if Jonathan Kraft is more involved in these football decisions than has been let on, then it's misleading. It's misleading all of the Patriots fans out there. And I don't know how you could trust this ownership if that is the case. All right. As we continue, second pod of the day, don't forget to give us that thumbs up. More likes means more eyeballs. That's how we slap the YouTube algorithm in the face. If you like an alternative, if you like what we do here with the Nick Cattle Show, give us that thumbs up and subscribe. 3,500 subscriptions is the goal. Spotify, Apple Pods, rate and review. And also, I've got a Patreon page that's popping $5 a month, $1.25 a week. Tons of draft content. Tons of draft content coming your way this week. We start with Drake May tonight. Very interesting metrics regarding Drake May and what that might mean for his NFL future. So tons of extra exclusive content for you at that Patreon page. All right, before we continue to move on, best name ever, McDowell's Human Resources Department. That is fantastic. No need in getting worked up with no sources. A lot of clickbait going into the draft. Well, it is sourced. It is sourced. I mean, I understand people saying, like, oh, this is just speculation. But when somebody who is respected in the game, when they come out with sourcing, reporting something, we talk about it. See, we can't play this game of not believing the media every single time the media says something. We just can't get into that game. How many people were upset at Seth Wickersham years ago about what he wrote in, what was it, 2017 about the Patriots? You fast forward 7 years later, what he wrote was pretty much exactly what happened. And we just saw it play out on a docuseries. So reporters have jobs for reasons. And I'm not telling you that everything that is reported ends up being fact. But I believe when respected, credible people come out with sourced information, I put stock into those reports. And if we don't, then what are we doing? I'm not going to go all crazy here because, look, I graduated with a journalism degree at URI, and I truly believe in the essence of journalism and that journalism helps us. Journalists find the truth. It doesn't mean that every single journalist does their job with the utmost responsibility and credibility. I'm not here to tell you that every single person who's been called a journalist is speaking the truth to the people. But once you start not believing things and just dismissing reports, where do you draw the line? I draw the line when people are reputable. Adam Schefter, right? Jeremy Fowler, Diana Rossini. These are people who are well-sourced. They are credible. Jay Glazer. It's not for every Tom, Dick, and Harry. So this is sourced. Diana Rossini is saying that she was told Jonathan Kraft is heavily involved in the decision-making when it comes to what to do with this third pick. So I go with it. I share it. And I say this is what's being reported. Again, not every single reporter is on the up and up. Not every single reporter is accurate. You got to sift through some things. You got to find the people that have done the best job and have had good sources in prior stories and with prior conversations. With that said, there is another side, and I want to get to that other side. We've heard from Tom Curran, very well sourced. Tom Curran has said the Krafts not involved in football decision-making. Greg Bedard has said he has not heard anything regarding Jonathan Kraft being involved. Burt Breer has also mentioned that he does not believe Jonathan Kraft is heavily involved. Now, it all depends on what your sources are saying, right? Again, I believe that Diana Rossini was told what she posted. I believe she was told that. Who told her that? We'll get to that in a minute. Again, many layers. Stick with me. I'll get through them all. But if you're looking at this, multiple local reporters have said, hey, look, Jonathan doesn't want that responsibility. He is not involved at that level. It's not some kind of conspiracy theory. I would point to this as I pointed to this earlier today. Tom Curran has been very good. Tom Curran has been especially good lately. And so if you're going to believe somebody, now maybe Tom Curran comes out tonight, maybe he comes out tomorrow, maybe he gets new information, because that's another thing that people fail to recognize is that things are fluid. Things are happening. You can get information 2 weeks ago. That information changes today, right? So maybe Curran comes out tonight. Maybe he comes out later today. Maybe he comes out tomorrow and says, you know what? I had heard before that Jonathan Kraft was not going to be involved, but I am hearing that Jonathan Kraft is involved. Maybe he changes his tune. Maybe he updates his reporting. But if Tom Curran stands by his reporting, with all due respect to Diana Russini, I would tend to believe Curran more than Russini. Now, there's a little bit of murkiness here because Curran, again, where's he get his information from? I don't know. But if Curran is getting his information from ownership, that's a problem. So you could look at this two ways. You could look at this as Tom Curran has the best information because he's closest to the situation, or you can look at this as he's too close to the situation. You want somebody from outside the New England bubble who might be more objective and get information that differs from what people around here are trying to leak out. That's the difficulty of it. That's the difficulty. You have a credible national reporter saying that Jonathan Kraft is going to be heavily involved. You've got Tom Curran, a very respected local journalist who's been right an awful lot the past few months, saying that he's heard Jonathan Kraft has not been as involved. Which one do you believe? You can look at the pros and cons of each one. That's why, if Russini's sourcing is good, and if that's what's happening in the building at Gillette, I have heavy concerns. I have big time concerns. But if it's Curran and it's Greg and it's Bert and those guys are saying that's not what's happening, and I'm sure those guys are going to go out there. The local reporters are going to go out there as soon as they see this information. They're going to start asking the questions. And again, they might change their tune after they talk to more people. But as of right now, we've had some conflicting reports about what Jonathan Kraft's role is. If he is making the ultimate decision at 3, disaster. If he's just sitting at the table, then he's just sitting at the table, and that's what I've expected from day one. So let's get into this. Who leaked the info? Who leaked the info? And I do see this from Lucky. Again, it's random if I see these things. The best way to get to the front of the line is sending a super chat because there's so many comments. Heavily involved could mean different things to Curran versus Russini. Lucky is completely right. Completely right. Heavily involved could mean heavily involved, that he is going to make this decision. Again, the way that Russini tweeted this, and I'll go back to the tweet just to make sure we're all on the same page. Russini tweeted, the New England Patriots are listening and taking calls from teams looking to move into the number 3 spot. While Elliot Wolf is running point, I'm told Patriots president Jonathan Kraft is heavily involved in the decision-making. The way that is presented, the way that it reads to me is that Wolf is doing the phone calls, the day-to-day grunt stuff, running point, while Jonathan is walking in heavily involved and saying, well, this is how I feel. But as Lucky points out, heavily involved, somebody, whoever talked to Russini could say, oh, I heard Jonathan Kraft is heavily involved. Okay, well, heavily involved, does that mean he's making the decision? Or does that mean that Elliot Wolf has to report to Jonathan Kraft every single time he takes a phone call? Right? So it could mean many different things. It could mean many different things. It depends on who is leaking the information, how that information is taken in from that reporter, and then how that reporter disseminates the information. All I can do, folks, is tell you what's being reported. I can tell you the person is credible. This is what's being reported, and this is how I read it. Now, Diana Russini hopefully will come out with a story that has more detail. Hopefully she'll have a full story and tell us exactly what heavily involved means. But as of right now, it's a post. It's a post. All right, so who leaked it? Let's get to that part. Enough of that other stuff. Who leaked it? Let's go through. Do you think Elliot Wolf in the front office? Do you think Elliot Wolf in the front office leaked this information? I'll give you some reasons why they would leak the information. They're frustrated. What if you're Elliot Wolf and you've been doing all of this work on the quarterbacks and you've been, making all these calls and taking all these calls? Maybe Elliot Wolf is frustrated. Again, I'm giving you the options in no particular order. We're trying to figure it out. I will give you my theory towards the end of this. Elliot Wolf. Let's say it's Elliot Wolf in the front office that's leaking this information to Diana Rossini. Why would they do that? I could justify that. I could say, well, again, he's frustrated. The front office is frustrated that they've done all of this work and the ownership is now coming in and the ownership is getting heavily involved and they're impacting certain decisions. And it's frustrating the guys that have been working in that front office to make sure that, they do the right thing. This would be the "it ain't us, fellas" kind of thing, right? You're trying to send the message to other teams as well that you've been working with. This isn't us. This isn't us. Ownership's involved here. If you're talking about Elliot Wolf in the front office leaking this, you could also say that they have their eye on future employers, right? Like if you're Elliot Wolf and you know what's going on behind the scenes and you're not necessarily thrilled, but you're working out your contract, right? You're finishing up your contract. Well, hey, maybe, just maybe, you're letting other owners know that if this thing ends up being a dumpster fire, it's not on you, it's on Jonathan Kraft. So that's one possibility. The Krafts, I think we can say the Krafts, no shot are they leaking this information. They gain nothing from this report, right? They gain absolutely nothing from this report. The agents of the players, I don't see any reason why they would be leaking this stuff. Why would agents get involved? It doesn't make much sense to me. Couple of other options coming up. I remind you, Alex Barth, tomorrow, 11 a.m., we dive deep into the prospects of this draft. Alex Barth on the show tomorrow at 11 a.m. on this YouTube channel. Don't forget to give us that thumbs up. More thumbs means more eyeballs. Try to expand the brand. One-man band here at the Nick Cattle Show, giving you the alternative. Give us that thumbs up. Subscribe to the show as well. And check out the Patreon channel for exclusive draft content this week. This week, $5 a month, $1.25 a week. All right, who else could be leaking this information? How about other GMs? How about other GMs leaking this information? Other GMs wanting to discredit the New England operation, right? Trying to make New England look bad. Maybe there are other GMs that are leaking this stuff to Diana Rossini because they're trying to gain more traction in their talks to move down. Let's say Arizona is trying to get the bag for the 4th pick. Well, maybe Arizona leaks this information to discredit the Patriots, so then another team pivots, that other team pivots and starts talking to Arizona. I think that could have some credence, right? Other teams trying to screw up what New England's trying to do. They're trying to jump the line to get draft capital for their pick. And they don't want New England to pull off a deal that could give them the Godfather offer and the Godfather-like assets. They want to force another team to move away from the Patriots, think that the Patriots are not trustworthy because the ownership's involved. So now, hey, work with us, right? If it's Monty Ossenfort of Arizona, perfect example. Say if Monty Ossenfort is trying to get the bag for the 4th pick. Monty used to work here in New England. So maybe Monty Ossenfort is leaking some information to make New England look like it's chaotic. They don't know. They don't know who is, running the operation here. Things are a little bit messy. And Monty is leaking this out. So now he sits there with the 4th pick and he talks to the Vikings. Hey, listen, you don't want to mess around with the Patriots. They're a mess. They're an absolute mess. You guys there at 4, work with us. Could be part of it. Super Chat comes in, and this is my next person on the list. S27. Bill Belichick leaking this information? I think it's a part of the conversation, isn't it? The way this tit for tat has gone on, it's been petty shot, petty shot, petty shot, petty shot. Would anybody at this point doubt that it's at least a possibility that Bill Belichick or somebody close to Belichick is leaking this information to Diana Rossini to make the Patriots look bad. It might not even be Belichick. It could be any former Patriot, anybody that was involved. It could be Bill O'Brien. It could be Burge. It could be Bellichick. It could be Joe Judge. It could be any former Patriot, any person that was part of the staff, any person that was part of the front office and still isn't here. It could be any of those people. It could be Matt Groh. It could be anybody in the front office right now that still feels somewhat aligned to Bellichick and doesn't like how things are being done over there now. Changed our grading system, did this, did that. Maybe they leaked the information. There's no doubt that that has to be on the table because of the tit for tat that we've seen, and also because it helps the narrative on their end. If New England looks like chaos, if Jonathan Kraft is getting involved, then the people that worked with Bellichick or are close to Bellichick or Belichick himself could point out and say, you see, that's why things started to go wrong. Go back to the ESPN story from months ago. The very first mention of Robin Glazer and Jonathan Kraft being involved with the decision-making process. You go back to that story. That story, in a way, was crafted, no pun intended, to make people look at it and say, hey, Belichick, he's out of New England, but not because he just forgot how to do things. There were all these other issues, including ownership, who started to meddle more. And it was ownership trying to get rid of Bill because they wanted him out of the way. This today would further carry that narrative. That ownership wanted Bill out of the way. They got Bill out of the way. They have the lame duck front office in the spot that they can manipulate and take advantage of, and they will make the final calls. That line of reasoning, that line of logic makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? The idea that this is just an extension. It's an extension of the report from months ago. And some of the same people are leaking the information now that were leaking the information then. Create chaos. Create chaos and make people believe that this is a dysfunctional franchise and that Belichick or you lost your job because not that you did a bad job, but because the dysfunction finally took over the operation. And the inevitable end came because Jonathan wanted to slide on in. Now, we've heard some other things, right? I mean, we've heard some disagreement about what Jonathan Kraft wants and what the Patriots want. There's been talk that, just recently it came out. Forget the exact report because there's been billions of them. But there was recently something that was written that said, hey, look, Jonathan actually saved Bellichick. Robert wanted to move on from Bellichick after 2022 because of the Matt Patricia Joe Judge nonsense, and it was Jonathan who supposedly saved Bellichick from losing the gig. He only postponed the inevitable until 2023. So there's a lot out there, and as I always remind people, leaking usually has some kind of an agenda. It's up to the reporter to talk to several different people to vet all of the information they get and give us the most responsible and accurate depiction of what's going on. But everybody that talks to a journalist, they have some kind of an agenda when you're talking about, professional sports especially. All right, so I want to take a look at why this came out now. Why did this come out now? Why are we hearing it on Monday, April 22nd? Well, Tony Pauline had this in his article today. He talked about the Patriots trading down. He talked about the Patriots wanting to move down. And he wrote, in his opinion, another team will have to overpay for the Patriots to move out of the third pick and pass on a quarterback, which is the owner's desire. Which is the owner's desire. That's according to Tony Pauline. So from what Tony Pauline has heard, the owner wants to draft the quarterback because he writes, my opinion, another team will have to overpay for the Patriots to move out of the third pick and pass on a quarterback, which is the owner's desire. I read that as the owner's desire is to draft a quarterback at 3. And there's lots of steam picking up around the 3rd pick. Let's get to the fun parts now. Jeremy Fowler reporting that the Vikings have been actively trying to move up in the NFL draft. So the Vikings are trying to move from 11 up to the top 5. Scout D NFL on Twitter. Now, people might say, Scout D NFL on Twitter, Nick? Seriously? Yes, seriously. This person is followed by Adam Schefter. They have over 9,000 followers. They don't follow anybody. If Adam Schefter follows this person, I have to believe that this person knows what they're talking about, at least in part. And Scout D NFL tweeted this. This is sexy. This is juicy. Patriots fans, listen to this. Scout D NFL posted, report, if Drake May is available at 3, we could see chaos on Thursday. The Patriots have received, quote, shocking Bryce type, unquote, offers for the pick, per source. The Vikings and Giants are willing to sell the farm. So someone asked Scout D NFL on Twitter, someone asked in the Twitter feed, what does a shocking Bryce type offer mean? And the response was, not allowed to speak on specifics, but it's an unprecedented offer that would force New England to give major consideration regardless of how they view the quarterback. So again, Scout D NFL, who doesn't follow anybody, has over 9,000 followers on Twitter/X, is followed by Adam Schefter and many others, tweeted out today that the Patriots have received multiple offers for the 3rd pick, and that those offers are unprecedented and would force New England to at least give major consideration of dealing the 3rd pick, no matter how they feel about the quarterback. Even if they love the person who's there at 3, this offer is so outrageous, or offers are so outrageous, that the Patriots have to absolutely entertain the idea of moving the pick. Which leads me to, regardless of how New England views the quarterback, let me give you a little bit of a hypothetical here. Let's say that Elliott Wolf loves Drake May. Let's say Drake May is going to be there at number 3. Let's say they have this unprecedented offer on the table, that Minnesota is willing to sell the farm to acquire the 3rd pick. Well, you know what happens? If you say, oh, regardless of how New England views the quarterback, not if New England is Jonathan Kraft, right? If you have an unprecedented offer on the table for number 3, and the front office looks at it and says, my freaking goodness, we have to make that trade. Yeah, this quarterback, we love him, but this trade is just outrageous. We can't pass this up. What if Jonathan Kraft says, no, you can pass it up, and we are going to pass it up because we want the quarterback? So the one way of the regardless of how New England views the quarterback, that's unless ownership does have some kind of mandate. Now, that has not been reported. But if Jonathan Kraft is heavily involved and he has some kind of mandate, or he lets the front office know, I want the quarterback, then it does matter. You can't say regardless of how you view the quarterback, because if the ownership is telling you to draft the quarterback, you might draft the quarterback, even if that offer is unprecedented on the table. Which begs the question, would the mandate be take the quarterback no matter who's left out of Daniels and May? Does Jonathan Kraft, Robert Kraft, do they look at this and they say, we'll be happy with either one of those guys, or J.J. McCarthy? We don't care. We love all those guys. Just get me the quarterback. And would that limit Wolf's ability to move down the board to make a deal like this? Because let's not get it twisted. I have to imagine that ownership worries much less about the grade than it does face of the franchise. So if Elliott Wolf in that front office has a certain grade on a certain quarterback, ownership might not care about that. They say, is he good? Yeah, we think he's good. Okay, then draft him. That could be the conversation. So what do I think is happening here? I have a theory. Before I give you the theory, as we approach an hour with this second podcast of the day. Don't forget to give us that thumbs up. All this content for free. Just give us that thumbs up. Takes a second of your time. You can subscribe to the channel as well. Trying to hit 3,500 subscriptions. That's the next goal. And we're hoping for a big week this week with the draft. So give us that thumbs up. Subscribe. Alex Barth tomorrow on the show to talk prospects at 11 a.m. Rate and review Spotify, Apple Pods. And, of course, we got the Patreon page you can check out. $5 a month. Here's what I think's happening, okay? Here's my theory. And it's just a theory. Gathering all the information that we have gathered, going through the layers that we have gone through over this past hour or so. Here's my theory. I think Elliott Wolf in the front office, I think they love one of Drake May and Jaden Daniels. I don't think they love both. I think they truly love one of those guys. And I think that's why you've heard so much over the last week or two. And every time that Mayo or Elliott Wolf have a chance to discuss the third pick, did you see how Adam Peters handled talking about the second pick last week during his press conference? He said, no, we're happy. We're happy with number 2. We'll be just fine sitting at number 2. Yeah, Elliott Wolf and Gerard Mayo, they've talked about the bag. They've talked about, the Godfather offer. Robert Kraft has come out and said, well, we won't move the pick unless it's a Godfather offer, whatever he said. I think Wolf in this front office, they love one guy. I think that guy is Drake May. I could be wrong. I've said it before. I think it's May. I could be totally wrong. But I think this front office loves one of May Daniels. And I think because they only love one of those guys, that they have been talking to teams. I believe, again, this is my theory, that Wolf, the front office, they love one quarterback. They don't have control over the situation because they draft third. And so they have to come up with every contingency plan they can. So if Washington drafts the guy that they love, if it is Drake May, and Washington drafts May, Elliott Wolf has been fielding offers for the last couple of months. He has those offers in hand. So just in case their guy is taken at 2, they can quickly pivot and make that deal. I think ownership wants a quarterback at 3. Ownership wants a quarterback at 3. They want that face of the franchise. And there is some friction going on here. Because the front office and Wolf, they have one guy in mind. They say, that guy is worth the third pick in the draft because they're thinking value, they're thinking football decisions, they're thinking all of that. The ownership is thinking, we need a quarterback, we're at 3, draft a quarterback. Right? So now you have frustrated teams. The Giants are frustrated because the Giants are trying to move up to 3. They can't get an answer from the Patriots. Minnesota's trying to move up to 3. They can't get a trade done just right now in this moment in time with the Patriots. And so now teams are getting a little bit frustrated. And other teams are getting frustrated because the Patriots are, God forbid, waiting until draft night to see if their guy falls to them. So out of that frustration, some of these leaks come out. That's how I feel this is going. And it could be that those teams are not leaking out this specific information, but those teams are having conversations with people that are in the game, and that's getting back to former Patriots, and those former Patriots are leaking this information. Here's what I'll say as we wrap up here. No matter who makes the call, there's no guarantee that it's going to work. Elliott Wolf, if he does have the final say, he could screw this up. Jonathan Kraft, if he is heavily involved, if he is the Wizard of Oz, he can screw this up. But I would much rather have the football people screw it up than ownership screw it up. Because the football people, they are educated within the game. They have worked most of their lives in football. They have done the scouting. They have done the homework. They've had these conversations. And they are the football brains. And I am a big believer in hiring people to do their job. Give them the autonomy. Get out of the way. Do what you do best. Accentuate the strengths, hide the weaknesses. And if this football team screws up this draft, I want the football people screwing up this draft. I don't want ownership playing fantasy football. That's all I ask. All I ask. I don't know what to make of these 75,000 reports. But if it is Jonathan Kraft that makes this call, it's a horrible idea. Hire your people, believe and trust your people, and let them do their job. And then you deal with the results. Let Elliott Wolf and the front office and this scouting staff and these coaches, let them do their jobs. I can only hope ownership stays out of the way. When it comes time to making this pick, you can have a seat at the table. But when that decision has to be made, do not influence, do not push it. Let them make the decision. Let those football people make those pivotal football decisions. All right. Second pod of the day is done. I still have to record one for the Patreon page. It's been a heavy talking day. Good stuff, though. I appreciate every single one of you for joining this podcast. As always, back tomorrow at 11 a.m. with Alex Barth to talk prospects. That's tomorrow at 11 on the YouTube channel. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Check out the Patreon if you're interested. Until next time, this is The Nick Cattle Show.